Your support keeps these stories alive. Like, subscribe, and ring the bell.
My name is Thomas, and I'm 40 years old. Growing up, I was never the son my parents wanted. At least, that's how they made me feel. I wasn't the star athlete like my older brother, Daniel, who seemed to glide through life with their constant praise. I wasn't the golden child like my younger sister, Emily, who charmed everyone at family gatherings. I was just Thomas. Average grades, average looks, and a quiet personality that my parents never seemed to appreciate. From as early as I can remember, the phrase, "not good enough," hung over my head like a shadow. If I brought home a report card with B's, my mother would sigh and say, "Why can't you be more like Daniel?" If I tried to share something I was proud of, my father would brush it off with a shake of his head. "That's fine, but Emily just won an award." No matter what I did, no matter how hard I tried, I was never enough in their eyes. Be why the time I was a teenager, I had learned to stop trying to impress them. Instead, I worked quietly on my own goals. I got a part-time job at a mechanic's shop, saved every penny I could, and taught myself skills nobody in my family cared about. While Daniel was out at football games and Emily was busy being adored, I was in the garage, learning how to fix engines and dreaming of starting my own business one day. When I graduated high school, the divide grew wider. My parents threw a huge party for Daniel when he got a scholarship, and another when Emily was accepted into a prestigious college. For me, nothing. I got a handshake from my father and a polite congratulations from my mother. That was it. I didn't have money for college, and they certainly weren't going to help me. So I did what I'd always done. I worked. I started small, fixing cars for neighbors, then rented a tiny garage, then slowly grew my client list. It was tough, grueling work, long hours, grease-stained hands, nights where I fell asleep at the shop, but I was building something. By the time I hit my 30s, I owned a thriving auto repair business with several employees. I bought a modest house, paid off my debts, and had savings in the bank. I wasn't flashy like Daniel, who was working for a big law firm, or Emily, who traveled abroad with her corporate job. But I had stability, independence, and pride in what I had built with my own two hands. My parents, however, never acknowledged it. At family dinners, they bragged endlessly about Daniel's cases and Emily's promotions, while my accomplishments were ignored. If I tried to bring up my business, my father would wave it off. "Anyone can fix cars, Thomas. Real success is in the office, not a garage." It hurt. I won't lie. Every time I walked out of those dinners, I felt like the invisible son, the one who never measured up. But I kept going. I had learned long ago that their approval wasn't coming, no matter what I did. Then everything changed. IT started slowly, with whispers about Daniel's law firm. He had been climbing fast, maybe too fast, taking risky cases and making powerful enemies. One day, I read in the paper that he was under investigation for mishandling client funds. Emily, on the other hand, was laid off when her company downsized. For the first time, the Golden children were struggling to make tea first. My parents brushed it off. "It's temporary," they said. "They'll bounce back." But the truth was, they weren't bouncing back. Daniel lost his job, his reputation in shambles, and Emily's debts from her lavish lifestyle started piling up with no income to cover them. And then came the blow that brought my parents to their knees. My father's business, the one he had run for decades, collapsed after years of poor management. Overnight, the stability they had always boasted about was gone. The house they had once flaunted as a symbol of success was in foreclosure. The retirement savings they thought would carry them through old age were drained. Suddenly, the family that had always looked down on me, the son who was never good enough, was on the brink of ruin. And in their desperation, they turned to the one person they had dismissed their entire lives, me. The first time my parents came to me for help, it was almost surreal. I was in the shop, finishing up paperwork after a long day, when I saw their car pull into the lot. It had been years since they'd visited me there. My father always said it smelled like oil and failure. Seeing him step out of the driver's seat, his shoulders slumped and his face tired, was like watching a statue crumble. My mother followed him, her perfect hair no longer perfect, her eyes red from crying. They walked into the office awkwardly, like strangers. For a moment, none of us spoke. Then my father cleared his throat. "Thomas," he said, his voice low. We need your help. I stared at him, my pen frozen in my hand. Help! The word echoed in my head. For decades, I had been invisible to them. Now, suddenly, I was their lifeline. What kind of help? I asked flatly. Why mother jumped in, her tone pleading. We're losing the house. The bank is threatening foreclosure. Your father's retirement is gone. Daniel can't support us. And Emily, she's barely keeping herself together. You're the only one who's stable right now. You have money, don't you? You could loan us something just until we get back on our feet. I let out a bitter laugh. Back on your feet? You've been standing on Daniel's and Emily's shoulders for years, bragging about them, worshiping them, while I was always the one who wasn't good enough. And now you're here, asking me to bail you out. My father winced. For the first time in my life, he didn't have a sharp reply. He just looked ashamed. We were wrong, he muttered. We didn't see what you built. We didn't respect it. But now you don't have a choice. I cut him off. My chest was tight with anger, but also something else, vindication. For years, I dreamed of this moment, the moment they would finally admit I wasn't the failure they claimed I was. But standing there, watching them beg, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt conflicted. Part of me wanted to slam the door in their faces, to tell them they had made their bed and could lie in it. But another part of me, the part that still, deep down, longed for their approval, hesitated. How much are we talking about? I asked cautiously. Why mother's eyes lit up with hope. $50,000. That would buy us time. Keep the bank away until we figure something out. $50,000. The number hit me like a hammer. I had the money. Yes, I had worked for years to save it. But it wasn't pocket change. It was a huge chunk of what I had built. You realize what you're asking me? I said slowly. That's not a small loan. That's my future. That's money I could use to expand my business, to secure my life. And you want me to hand it over because Daniel screwed up and Emily can't pay her bills? Silence filled the office. My parents shifted uncomfortably, their shame palpable. Finally, my father spoke again, his voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. Thomas, we don't have anyone else. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. Their words replayed in my mind. We don't have anyone else. For so long, I had been the forgotten son, the afterthought. And now I was the only one left. The next morning I called them. I'll help you, I said, but on my terms. No more dismissing me. No more comparing me to Daniel and Emily. If I'm going to put my hard-earned money into this family, you're going to respect me for once in your lives. There was a pause on the line. Then my mother whispered, Of course, we promise. But promises are cheap. And though I handed them that first check, part of me knew this wasn't the end. This was only the beginning of a storm I hadn't yet seen coming. Because when people are desperate, gratitude fades quickly. And my parents were about to prove that to me in ways I never expected. At first, I told myself I had done the right thing. I convinced myself that giving my parents that money would buy me something I had never had before, their respect. Maybe, finally, they would see me as more than the son who was never good enough. Maybe they would understand that while Daniel's career had crumbled and Emily's glamorous life had fallen apart, I had built something solid, something that actually lasted. But it didn't take long for me to realize how naive I was. The first few weeks after I gave them the money, my parents were unusually warm. They called me more often, spoke kindly, even thanked me. It was strange hearing my mother say, We're proud of you, Thomas. Part of me wanted to believe it was genuine. But another part, deeper, sharper, knew it was tied to the check I had written. And sure enough, once the initial relief wore off, the demand began again. IT started small. My mother called one afternoon, saying, The car needs repairs, and your father's pension checks don't stretch far. Could you help out with this bill? It was only a few $100s, and since I ran a repair shop, I fixed the car myself and covered the parts. Then my father mentioned their property taxes being overdue. Just a temporary setback, he said. If you could cover it this year, we'll manage next year. That was another few $1,000s gone. Soon, every phone call felt like another bill. My savings, the money I had worked years to build, was bleeding away in small but constant cuts. And worse, the tone of their voices changed. Gratitude turned into expectation. Requests turned into demands. Point one evening, I finally confronted them. Do you even realize how much I've given you already? I asked, my voice sharp. $50,000, plus the repairs, plus the taxes. That's more than I ever thought I'd give away in my life. And still, you keep asking for more. When does it end? My mother looked at me with that same disappointed expression I had grown up with. Thomas, you act like we're strangers. We're your parents. Family is supposed to help family. I clench my fists. Family is supposed to respect each other. Do you even remember how you treated me all those years? I was never good enough. You ignored everything I did. And now, suddenly, I'm good enough because I'm the one keeping you afloat? For the first time, I saw guilt flicker in my father's eyes. But instead of admitting it, he doubled down. You should be grateful we pushed you. Maybe if we hadn't been hard on you, you wouldn't have worked so hard to prove yourself. You wouldn't be in a position to help us now. His words hit me like a punch. So even my success, even the stability I had built, was twisted into something they could take credit for. That night, I went home furious. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at my bank statements. The numbers were shrinking, my dreams of expanding my business slipping further away. And for what? For parents who saw me not as a son, but as an endless resource. The final straw came a month later. They invited me to dinner, something they hadn't done in years. I thought maybe, just maybe, they wanted to reconnect. But halfway through the meal, my mother cleared her throat and said, Thomas, we've been talking. Amelia and Daniel need help too. They're struggling, and it's not fair that you only support us. You should share what you have with your brother and sister as well. I nearly choked on my food. Are you serious? After everything? You want me to bail them out too? My father nodded solemnly. They're family, and you're the one in the best position to help. I pushed my chair back, my hands trembling with rage. You gotta be kidding me. I've given you tens of thousands already, and now you want me to bankroll the people you spent my whole life comparing me to? The ones who look down on me? The ones who never lifted a finger to help themselves? Silence fell over the table. Amelia and Daniel weren't even there, but their shadows loomed large. My parents just sat there, staring at me with the same entitled expressions I had known my entire life. That was the night I realized something crystal clear. No matter how much I gave, it would never be enough. They would drain me dry, then demand more, and I knew then that I had a choice to make. Either I kept sacrificing myself to win love and approval that would never come, or I finally walked away and chose myself. That IT was the hardest decision of my life. But deep down, I knew what I had to do. The night of that dinner burned into my memory. I remember walking out of my parents' house with my fists clenched, my jaw tight, my blood boiling. For nearly 40 years, I had lived under their shadow, dismissed, compared, belittled. And even after I gave them more money than I could ever have imagined parting with, they still saw me as nothing more than a tool, a wallet, a safety net for the children they actually loved. The next morning, my phone started buzzing again. First, it was my mother, then my father, both leaving voicemails filled with guilt trips. Thomas, you misunderstood us. My mother's voice rang through my voicemail. We just want what's best for the family. Your brother and sister need you. We all need you. Then my father, son, this is your chance to step up. Family comes first. Don't be stubborn. I deleted them both without listening to the end. Days later, Amelia herself showed up at my shop. She looked different than the glamorous sister my parents used to parade around. The years of debt, stress, and failure had left marks on her face. But her tone hadn't changed much. Thomas, she said, leaning against the counter like she owned the place. Mom and Dad told me you've been helping them. That's good. But listen, I'm behind on rent, and Eric and I could really use a hand. Just a loan. You know I'll pay you back. I couldn't help it. I laughed right in her face. A loan? From you? You've been calling me a loser my entire life. Do you remember the Christmas when you said my hands would always smell like oil because I wasn't smart enough for a real career? And now you're here, in my shop, begging for money. Her cheeks flushed. That was years ago. Why are you holding on to that? We're family, Thomas. Families forgive. I shook my head. Families also respect. And you never respected me. You only come here because you've run out of options. She glared at me then, The same superiority in her eyes I'd seen my whole life, but now cracked with desperation. Fine, be selfish. Don't think this won't come back to you. I watched her walk out, and for the first time in years, I felt no guilt. Just clarity, but my parents didn't let it go. That weekend, they invited me over again. Against my better judgment, I went thinking maybe, just maybe, they were ready to talk honestly. Instead, I walked into an ambush. Daniel and Amelia were both there, sitting at the table with my parents. Why father wasted no time. Thomas, sit down. We need to settle this. Your siblings are struggling. Your sister's marriage is in shambles. Your brother is trying to rebuild after losing his job. You're the only one doing well. It's time to share your success with the family. I stayed standing. Share my success? You mean hand over everything I've worked for so they don't have to face the consequences of their choices? My mother slammed her hand on the table. You're being cruel. Don't you see? You were blessed with stability so you could take care of them. That's your role. That's why God made you the way you are. Her words stunned me. My role? To be the family's backup plan? To bleed myself dry so they could keep living in denial? Something inside me snapped. No, I said firmly, my voice shaking with anger but clear as glass. My role was never to be your servant. My role was never to fund Amelia's fantasies or Daniel's arrogance. You spent my whole life telling me I wasn't good enough, and now that your golden children have fallen, suddenly I'm a savior? I won't do it. Not anymore. Daniel stood up, his face red. You think you're better than us now? Just because you fix cars and save a little money? You'll never be more than the grease monkey we always knew you as. I stepped closer to him, my voice low and steady. Funny, the grease monkey is the only one keeping this family from collapsing completely. Maybe you should think about that before you open your mouth. The room went silent. My parents stared at me as though they didn't recognize me. Amelia muttered something under her breath, but no one dared push further. I turned and walked out, leaving them sitting in their broken kingdom of pride and entitlement. That night, lying in bed, I realized something had changed forever. I had drawn the line. For the first time in my life, I had stood up and told them no, and I meant it. But deep down, I also knew they weren't finished. People like my parents never stopped demanding. And the next time they came to me, it wouldn't just be for money. It would be for survival. And when that day came, I would finally decide whether I still owed them anything at all. It was almost a year after that confrontation when the final collapse came. By then, I had grown used to the silence. My parents barely called me anymore, except for the occasional voicemail that I never returned. Amelia stopped showing up at my shop, and Daniel kept his distance too. For the first time in decades, I was living without their constant voices telling me I wasn't good enough. My business was stable, my home was peaceful, and my life was finally mine. Then, one rainy Sunday evening, I heard a knock at the door. Slow, weak, reluctant. When I opened it, my parents stood there. They didn't look like the proud people I had grown up with. My father's hair was almost completely white, his posture bent. My mother's face was lined with worry, her once sharp eyes dulled with exhaustion. Thomas, my father said softly, we need to talk. I let them in. They sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I had eaten countless meals alone while they celebrated Daniel and Amelia's achievements. My mother's hands trembled as she held a cup of tea I poured her. Finally, she spoke. The house is gone. Foreclosed. We sold everything we could, but it wasn't enough. Daniel moved to another state, chasing work, but he's barely scraping by. Amelia, she's divorced now, drowning in debt, and living in a tiny apartment. We're staying with a cousin, but it's not permanent. Thomas, we don't have anywhere else to go. Her voice cracked on the last words. For the first time in my life, I saw my parents not as unshakable, judgmental figures, but as fragile, broken people who had been crushed by their own arrogance. Why father looked me in the eyes then, and his voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it. We were wrong, son. About you. About everything. We thought success was in titles and appearances. We never saw the strength in what you were building. And we hurt you. I know we did. But right now, we don't have anyone else. We need you. For years, I had dreamed of this moment. The moment my parents would finally admit I wasn't the failure they made me out to be. That I was, in fact, the one who had survived, who had endured, who had built a life worth something. And here it was, laid bare in front of me, that a storm of emotions surged inside me. Anger, satisfaction, sadness, pity. Part of me wanted to throw them out, to tell them to sleep in the bed they had made, to remind them of every insult, every dismissal, every time they made me feel invisible. Another part of me, the boy who had once longed for their love, wanted to embrace them, to forgive, to finally feel like a son, that I took a deep breath, my hands gripping the edge of the table. Do you even understand what you did to me? For 40 years, you told me I wasn't good enough. You ignored my work, dismissed my life, compared me to Daniel and Amelia every chance you got. You left me out of celebrations, mocked my career, treated me like I was less than family. And now, after losing everything, you come here because I'm the only one left standing. Tears welled in my mother's eyes. My father bowed his head. Neither of them argued. For once, they had no defense that I stood up, pacing the room, my voice trembling with intensity. I built this life by myself. Every dollar, every brick, every ounce of stability, I earned it. Without help, without recognition. And now you see it. Now you finally admit I was never the failure you thought I was. The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, I sighed. I'll help you, but not because you deserve it. Not because you earned it. I'll help because I refuse to become like you. Blind, bitter, and cruel. You can stay here for now, until you find something else. But the days of treating me like I'm less are over. If you live under my roof, you treat me with respect. No more comparisons. No more insults. You want my help, you play by my rules. They both nodded, almost too quickly, like children who had just been scolded that night. As I lay in bed, I stared at the ceiling and thought about how life had turned. My parents had lost everything. Their money, their pride, their illusions. And in the end, the son they had always said wasn't good enough was the only one they had left. I don't know if they'll ever truly change. Maybe deep down, they'll always see Daniel as the golden boy and Emily as the star. But one thing is certain. They can no longer deny the truth that my name is Thomas. I am 40 years old, and for most of my life, my parents told me I wasn't good enough. But when they lost everything, I was the one they needed. And that is the sweetest revenge I never had a plan.